My parents loved my golden brother more than me and sold my car to pay for his vacation. My name is Ellis, and I'm 27 now. I haven't told this story before, not fully, at least not in a way that puts everything together. But maybe writing it out will help me make sense of what happened, or maybe it'll just be a record that I didn't imagine at all. Either way, here it is. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. Not the kind of small town that makes postcards or where everyone knows your name in a warm, fuzzy way. More like the kind of town where people remember who your parents are, and that's the only thing they ever care about. And if your parents play favorites, then that's the role you live in permanently. My parents, Lorraine and Charles, had 2 sons, me and my younger brother, Benton. We were only about a year apart in age, but you'd think we were living in completely different worlds. From the outside, it probably looked like we had a normal family. My dad was a mechanic with his own small garage on the edge of town, and my mom worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental clinic. We had a modest house, a decent yard, a grill out back that my dad rolled out every summer. It was comfortable enough, I guess. But what made it hard wasn't the roof over our heads, it was the way they looked right through me like I was just some extra in someone else's story. If you asked my parents, they'd probably tell you they loved both of us equally. They'd swear it, maybe even believe it. But if you were actually in our house for more than an hour, you'd start to notice. Benton, he was the star. The golden boy. The kid who, as my mom once put it, just shines a little brighter. And me? I was the quiet one. The other one. Sometimes, even just him. It started early. I remember Benton getting this big red tricycle with streamers on the handles for his 3rd birthday. I got a pair of pajamas from a discount bin. When he turned 6, he had a party with a clown and custom cupcakes shaped like baseballs. I turned 7 that year and got a cake from the grocery store with the wrong name on it. Elliot. Close enough, I guess. It wasn't the stuff that hurt the most. It was the pattern. The way Benton's interests became family events and mine became distractions. Benton started playing t-ball when he was 5, and from that point on, our weekends belonged to him. Tournaments, practices, team photos. My dad would shine up the car every Saturday morning like we were driving to a parade. And I'd be in the back seat, sketchbook in hand, quietly drawing buildings or cars or whatever caught my imagination. I got into art when I was in middle school. It was the only place where I felt seen, where teachers noticed me. I even had a painting selected for the state fair in 8th grade. I told my parents. They nodded and said they were proud. They never showed up to see it. Meanwhile, our living room became a Benton museum. Framed jerseys, photos of him swinging a bat, medals, even a broken bat mounted on the wall. My mom once said, "It's like he was born to do something great." I wanted to ask her what she thought I was born for, but I didn't. I started pulling away around high school. Not in a rebellious way. I just stopped expecting things. I stopped sharing good news. I'd come home with a test I'd aced or a small scholarship offer and leave it on the counter. It'd be gone by morning, usually tossed under junk mail or used as a coaster. But I kept going. I studied. I worked. I stayed out of trouble. I wanted to get out of that house more than anything. So I poured myself into school and part-time jobs. By the time I was a senior, I had a 3.9 GPA and was accepted into a state university on a merit-based grant. I didn't ask them for help. I didn't need to. I'd earned every bit of it myself. Graduation came, and even though I knew not to expect much, I still hoped. I stood outside the school auditorium in my cap and gown, clutching my diploma cover while families all around me took photos, hugged their kids, handed out flowers. I waited 10 minutes. Then 20. I finally called my mom's phone. No answer. Finally, my dad pulled up in the car. Benton was in the back seat, still in his baseball uniform, finishing a fast food sandwich. "Sorry," my dad said as he barely rolled down the window. Benton had practice. There was traffic. No hug. No photo. No "we're proud of you." Just a ride home and silence. I didn't say much that night. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the diploma. I'd done everything I could. Everything right. And it still hadn't been enough to matter. College was my escape. I moved into a tiny dorm and later into a shared apartment off campus. I worked 2 jobs, one tutoring, the other behind the register at a hardware store. I kept my head down, lived frugally, and never looked back. When I was 23, after years of side gigs and saving every spare cent, I bought a used pickup truck. A deep gray 2015 Chevy Colorado with cloth seats and a dent in the bumper. It wasn't fancy, but it ran smooth and felt solid. It was mine. Every cent of it. I signed the papers on my own, drove it off the lot, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes just looking at the keys in my hand. It wasn't just a truck. It was proof. That I could make something for myself. That I didn't need them to hand me anything. That I'd built something real on my own. I drove to my parents' house that weekend to show them. My dad looked it over and said I overpaid. My mom asked why I didn't get something smaller, more fuel efficient. Benton made a joke about borrowing it for the weekend. I told him no. That truck was for me. For once, just me. 2 months later, right before Thanksgiving, I flew out of state for a work conference. It was my first time flying for business, and the company even paid for the hotel. I came back late Sunday evening, took a rideshare home, and as we pulled into my apartment complex, I froze. The parking space was empty. My truck was gone. At first, I thought I was just tired. Maybe I parked in a different spot, or someone had moved it. I walked the lot twice, scanning every corner, checking the overflow area across the street. But I knew deep down that it wasn't there. And it hadn't been moved. I called the towing company contracted with the complex. Nothing. No record. No report. No tows in the last 3 days that matched my vehicle. It wasn't misplaced. It wasn't towed. It was gone. I stood there for nearly an hour in the cold, my phone pressed to my ear as I filed a report with the local police. A quiet, tired officer came out around midnight. He asked me all the usual questions: make, model, color, license plate, VIN number, aftermarket parts. I told him everything. And the whole time, my mind wasn't just on the truck. It was on what was in it. My work laptop. A small toolkit. A backpack with my gym clothes. An envelope in the glove box with about $400 in emergency cash. Nothing irreplaceable, but all mine. Things I'd worked for. Bought with money I'd earned doing long shifts and late nights. The officer nodded, jotted things down, and promised they'd be in touch. Then he drove off, and I was left staring at an empty space. I barely slept that night. The next few days were a blur of insurance calls and paperwork. They asked about coverage. I had basic liability. No comprehensive. No theft protection. I knew I wouldn't get much, if anything, back. I didn't tell my family right away. I wasn't even planning to go to Thanksgiving that year. But something in me didn't want to give them the satisfaction of thinking I was avoiding them. So I told myself I'd go. Eat dinner. Keep the peace. Leave early. That was the plan. I arrived Wednesday evening. My mom answered the door like nothing had happened. She hugged me with that performative warmth she always saved for holidays. My dad waved from the couch. Benton was already mid-story, telling everyone about a business idea he had involving custom phone cases with motivational quotes. I sat down at the table, tried to eat, tried to engage. But all I could think about was the truck. The space it used to occupy. The feeling of having something solid, something mine, just vanish. So halfway through Benton explaining why college was a scam, I cleared my throat and said, by the way, my truck was stolen. Everything paused for a moment. Forks stopped midair. Glasses hovered halfway to mouths. Then my dad leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said with a slight smirk. It wasn't stolen. We sold it. I stared at him. At first, I thought he was joking. Some kind of awful attempt at humor. Then my mother added, without even looking up, well, it was just sitting there. You didn't even call while you were gone. My mind struggled to connect the dots. You sold my truck? My voice cracked more from confusion than anger. How? I never gave you the title. I never gave you the key. That spare key you left with us a while back? We used that, my dad said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. And the title? We found it in your old filing box. He said it like they had reorganized my bookshelf. Not committed a felony. They had entered my apartment while I was out of town, found the vehicle title, forged my signature, and sold my truck to someone named Cal, one of my dad's old friends from his softball league. For $12,800. They pocketed the cash. I just sat there, stunned. Trying to process the layers of what they were saying like it was a casual update on the weather. My mother kept eating. My father looked proud. And Benton? Benton looked slightly uncomfortable for all of 2 seconds before he perked up and said, well, now that it's out there. Courtney and I are going to Cancun next month. Oceanfront suite. All inclusive. He grinned, then added, couldn't have done it without your help, bro. I looked at him. Then back at my parents. Waiting for anyone, to say it had gone too far. To apologize. To show even a flicker of guilt. Instead, my dad shrugged and said, it's Benton's honeymoon, Ellis. We figured you'd understand. You weren't even using it. My mother nodded. That truck wasn't practical, anyway. You don't need something that big just for driving to work. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, my whole body hollowing out. And then Benton, in that same tone he used when he broke things as a kid and didn't care, said, come on, man. It's just a truck. That sentence, those 5 words, did something to me. Because it was never just a truck. It was my independence. My effort. My years of doing it alone while they poured everything into him. And they sold it. Without permission. Without apology. I didn't leave right away. Maybe I was still hoping one of them would pull me aside and admit it had been a mistake. But all I got was my dad talking about how Benton was finally starting to find direction and how the family needed to make some sacrifices. A truck. A sacrifice. Not theirs, mine. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I just said, excuse me, and walked out the front door. It was the last time I stepped into that house. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up on the couch in my apartment, surrounded by silence and the dull ache that sits between grief and anger. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I walked out of my parents' house the night before. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't know where to begin. They had sold my truck. Entered my home without permission. Forged my name. Lied to my face. And they had done it like it was nothing. I needed to make sense of what had happened, not just emotionally, but practically. If they'd gone through my things once, what else had they taken? I pulled out the storage bin where I kept my documents, tax returns, employment records, contracts, loan paperwork, everything. As I sifted through the folders, I found one I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled like the rest and had no business being where it was. Curious, I opened it, expecting maybe a misplaced work form. But it wasn't that. Inside were bank statements. From banks I had never used. With my name on them. At first, I thought it might be a misprint. Maybe someone else with my name. But then I saw my address off by 1 digit. The phone number? Just 1 number off mine. Enough to redirect things without raising a flag. Then came another envelope. And another. Each one more unsettling than the last. I had credit cards open in my name from stores I hadn't shopped at since high school. A gas card that had been maxed out. 2 general credit cards with balances totaling nearly $18,000. And then a personal loan for $39,000 opened nearly 2 years ago. None of this was mine. My hands went cold. My mouth went dry. And suddenly the missing truck was just the beginning. I logged into my credit monitoring service. I hadn't checked it in a while. There had never been a need to. I paid on time. I kept my usage low. But when the page loaded, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. My credit score, once in the 760s, had plummeted. 4 cards in collections. A delinquent loan. Missed payments. Defaults. Warnings. There was a lease agreement in my name for a living room set, a leather couch, an ottoman, a dining table. All sent to my parents' address. I remembered my mother mentioning, just weeks earlier, how they finally upgraded the furniture. It hadn't even registered at the time. Now I understood why she didn't seem too excited about it, because she didn't buy it. I did. In their eyes, it was all fine. Because I was responsible. Because I'd bounce back. Because I was the one who didn't make trouble. They'd opened the accounts. Used my name. Used my social security number. Used old documents from my files, documents they'd stolen. The charges were everywhere. Gaming consoles. Flights. Hotel stays. Even a down payment on a hot tub. A hot tub. My mother had posted about it online, celebrating 31 years of love with a little luxury. Champagne emoji. Heart emoji. And now I was the one legally responsible for every dollar of it. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This was deliberate. I called my bank. Then the credit bureaus. I froze all accounts. Set fraud alerts. Changed every password I had. I spent the next 2 days cataloging everything. I printed every statement, circled every suspicious transaction, and highlighted every forged application. I organized the documents by category: cards, loans, leases, emails. It filled an entire binder. Then I called Rachel. She was a local attorney I'd met through a friend at work, someone who had helped another client recover from a case of financial abuse. I didn't think I'd ever need someone like her, but I remembered her name, and now I needed help. We met that week in her office. I handed her the binder. She didn't interrupt once as she flipped through the pages. When she finally closed the cover, she looked at me and said, "Ellis, this isn't just identity theft. This is criminal fraud. And we can prove it." It was the first time in weeks I felt like I wasn't losing my mind. Rachel walked me through the legal process. She told me what evidence we needed, what agencies to notify, how to prepare statements, and what would happen next. That afternoon, I filed a formal report with the police. The officer assigned to my case was cautious at first until I started showing him the files. Matching names, addresses, phone numbers. A paper trail that led straight to my parents' house. He raised his eyebrows when I told him how they'd sold the truck. He leaned back in his chair when I showed him the hot tub lease, the furniture delivery, the $39,000 loan with my forged signature. He said, "This is going to be bigger than we thought." Over the next few weeks, the investigation began in earnest. Subpoenas were issued. Statements were collected. The banks confirmed multiple signatures didn't match. Calls were traced. Application logs were pulled. Everything pointed back to them. And just like that, the truth was no longer something I carried alone. It was now part of a formal criminal case. My parents tried to play it quiet. At first, they ignored the situation, thinking I'd come around. Then, slowly, the whispers began. A cousin called, trying to guilt me into dropping the charges. "They didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "They're your family." Another relative messaged me, "Your mom hasn't slept in days. Your dad hasn't eaten." I didn't respond. They weren't worried when they signed my name. They weren't crying when they spent my future. They were only sorry now that there were consequences. It took nearly 5 months from the day I filed the report to the day my parents were officially charged. Multiple counts: identity theft, forgery, wire fraud. They never denied it. Not once. Instead, their attorney tried to push a settlement. Something quiet. No trial, no court appearances. Just working it out within the family. But it was past that point. Rachel made sure everything was airtight. Every signature compared. Every statement cross-verified. Phone records. Account histories. Even a copy of my scanned driver's license, which they had retrieved from my apartment files without my knowledge. They had walked into my life, taken what they wanted, and walked back out without looking over their shoulders. Now, finally, they were looking back. The final deal was made through a plea agreement. They avoided jail time, but they were sentenced to 5 years of supervised probation and ordered to pay $80,000 in restitution, the total amount of stolen funds, interest, legal costs, and financial damages. Their finances were audited. Garnishments were applied. The judge called their actions premeditated and egregious. They didn't speak in court. Their lawyer read a short statement, something about regret, poor decisions, and family hardship. No emotion. No direct apology. Just words that would check the legal box. I didn't speak either. I didn't need to. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I won. But because the burden I had carried alone was finally shared. It was real. It was acknowledged. And it was theirs to carry now. The first restitution payment came 2 months later. I stared at the notification for a long time. Not because of the money, though yes, it helped, but because of what it represented. Accountability. I didn't spend it immediately. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my couch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight move across the floor, and allowed myself to breathe in a way I hadn't for a very long time. With Rachel and a financial advisor, I used the money to clear the debts tied to my name. We negotiated settlements where possible. We provided documentation to credit agencies to prove the fraud. Bit by bit, the damage unraveled. It took almost a year, but my credit was restored. My accounts secured. My identity rebuilt. I used what was left to make my first real investment, something quiet, something promising. A small logistics startup one of my tech contacts had pitched to me at a conference. I'd been hesitant at first, but after reading the plan and meeting the team, I took the leap. It paid off. 6 months later, the startup was acquired, and my share brought in a $42,000 return. I didn't buy anything flashy. I didn't tell anyone. I just wired the money into a brand new account, one no one had access to but me. And then I bought a car. Not to replace the truck. Not as revenge. But as a quiet promise to myself. A deep navy blue electric sedan. Clean, efficient, peaceful. I paid for it outright, no cosigner, no loan, no parental interference. Then I moved. I found a loft in the city, sunlight, hardwood floors, and space to breathe. Not oversized. Not luxury. Just mine. It had a balcony overlooking a quiet street, a corner kitchen with matte black appliances, and a small reading nook where I could sit with a mug of tea and feel still. I didn't update my parents. Didn't leave a forwarding address. I simply left. I blocked every number except my grandfather's. He was the only one who had called me, quietly, gently, after the charges were filed. The only one who said, "I believe you. And I'm proud of you." We still talk every Sunday. The rest of the family fell into one of two groups, those who stayed silent, and those who told themselves I had overreacted. I became the story whispered at birthday parties I didn't attend. The name left off group texts. The one who walked away. But I didn't walk away. I chose myself. 2 years passed. I kept working. Moved up at the company. Started managing a small team. Mentored an intern who reminded me a little of myself at 19, quiet, focused, unsure he belonged. I told him what no one ever told me, "You do." Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a phone call. Blocked number. I don't know why I answered. But I did. It was my mother. Her voice was tired. Worn down. She said my name, then paused for a long time before speaking. My father had lost his job. They had missed multiple payments. The restitution was bleeding them dry. Benton had moved back in again. They were days away from eviction. "We need your help," she said. Her voice trembled. I let the silence hang. I thought about the debt collectors I had faced. The nights I sat in my car wondering how to pay tuition. The truck I worked years for, sold behind my back. "We need your help. Not we're sorry. Not what we did was wrong. Just, help us." I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I didn't offer bitterness. The next morning, I drove to the address she gave me. It was a roadside motel just off the highway. Their car was parked out front, battered, old, leaning to one side. I pulled up in silence. My mother came out first, followed by my father, then Benton. They looked tired. Weathered. Like people who had run out of stories. I didn't get out of the car. I rolled down the window, looked at them through the glass, and said, "Remember when you sold my truck? You said, it's just a car." I paused. "Well, now it's just a life. Yours." And then I drove away. No speeding. No drama. Just quiet. Just done. It's been almost 3 years since then. My credit is stable. My work is meaningful. My home is quiet. And my peace is real. I still hear about them now and then, through my grandfather, mostly. They're getting by. Not well, not terribly. Just getting by. And that's fine. I don't need revenge. I don't need apologies. I just needed distance. A chance to build something that was mine. And I did. Thank you for reading. Have you ever had to walk away from people you thought you couldn't? Have you ever had to choose yourself, even when no one else would? I'd like to know. Because this story is mine. But maybe it echoes someone else's too. Thank you all for watching the video, and see you soon.